Have you ever scrolled through research and felt like you're just drowning in all this information, trying to figure out like what's what?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost.
It is. So we're diving into meta-analysis today, which can really help us cut through all that noise.
It's like a superpower for research,
Okay, so more than just reading a lot of
but
studies,
way more.
because our source material mentions it's like the definitive way to summarize research.
Right. Think of trying to see a huge picture, but you're only seeing these tiny little pieces at a time.
Okay.
Meta-analysis takes all those pieces, those findings from every single study, and combines them to show you the whole picture, and that gives you a much more complete and reliable understanding.
So it's like instead of getting lost in the weeds of one study, you're getting this big picture view with meta-analysis.
Exactly, and that's so valuable because it helps you make better decisions.
And it makes me think too about how our source material mentions studies using meta-analysis are cited way more often. There's got to be a reason for that, right?
Definitely, it's about like the weight of the evidence. Would you rather base a decision on just one study
Right.
that might have limitations, might be biased, or would you rather have a synthesis of like dozens of studies?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So we've established that meta-analysis is really important, but like what exactly are we trying to do with it?
So there are two main goals with meta-analysis. First, it figures out the true strength of a relationship between things. Like, let's say you want to know about the link between personality and job performance.
Okay.
Meta-analysis can measure that relationship, go beyond just like speculation, and give you a statistically sound answer.
So no more gut feelings. Or
Exactly.
just anecdotal evidence.
Right. And the second goal is uncovering hidden factors that can change that relationship. So just because one study shows something positive between two things doesn't mean it's always strong or even there in every situation.
Right, right. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly. Meta-analysis helps us find those little nuances, those it depends factors that sometimes make a relationship stronger or weaker, depending on what else is going on. So that leadership training everyone loves
Yeah.
could be amazing for some teams, not so much for others. Meta-analysis can pinpoint those differences.
Okay, so you're making me think differently about like how I read research now. It's like I'm looking for clues to solve a mystery.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And just like a good mystery, there are going to be some twists and turns. One thing that surprised me when I first started learning about meta-analysis is it's not just this like one-size-fits-all approach. There are choices you make at every step.
Mm-hmm.
And those choices, they can really change the conclusions you get.
So it's not just putting numbers in a formula.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Our source material actually uses the example of research on the GMAT, which a lot of people take for business school. And researchers found that the actual statistical techniques they used to correct for quirks in the data actually changed how they interpreted whether or not the GMAT is a good predictor of success.
Interesting. So it's definitely more like detective work then.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you're making judgment calls and those really matter. So where do you even begin?
Well, our source material breaks it down into four main parts. You've got your data collection, data preparation, data analysis, and then reporting.
Okay.
Each of those has its own things to think about, its own challenges.
So it's a journey.
Yeah.
And every good journey needs a roadmap. So let's start with that first stage, data collection.
This is where it gets fun, data collection. This is where the adventure really begins.
Right.
You might think it's just like, oh, find all the studies.
Yeah.
But it's way more than that.
Yeah.
Our source material actually compares it to a treasure hunt.
Okay.
You need a good plan if you want to find the best stuff.
So no, like digging random holes in the sand, hoping to strike gold.
Right. You got to know where you're going.
Yeah.
You got to define what you're looking for, your research question. Make sure it's focused enough to give you good information, but not so narrow that you're missing stuff.
So not too broad, not too narrow. You got to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to watch out for what's called availability bias. It's like, relying on stuff that's just easy to find.
Right.
It's like thinking all the best treasures on the first beach you see.
Makes sense. You don't want to miss out on a whole trove of stuff just because it's harder to find.
Yeah, you might have to dig through old dissertations,
Oh, wow.
conference papers, maybe even research in other languages
It's a lot. It can be.
to get the full picture.
Yeah, it can be really helpful to bring in a research librarian. They can really help you navigate through all that.
Okay, so it takes a team, right? So let's say we've got all our treasure chests full of data.
Mm-hmm.
What's next? What
Yeah.
do we do with it?
So that's data preparation.
Okay.
Now we got to clean and polish those findings. So what does that look like? It makes me think of like, I don't know, someone meticulously like cleaning the dirt off of ancient artifacts or something.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
One of the tough things is that sometimes you're dealing with studies that measure the same thing in totally different ways.
Right. They're not standardized.
It's like having like 5 different maps. They've all got different scales and symbols,
Mm.
but they're all charting the same territory.
Oh,
You
no.
can't just like put those maps together. You got to find a way to make them match up.
You got to find that common language, right?
Yeah,
For
exactly.
those different data points.
So there are methods to create like composite scores that take similar measures and make them into one standardized thing.
Oh, okay.
And then sometimes you find those data points that are just totally out there,
Oh, yeah.
like finding a pirate doubloon with Roman coins.
Right, right.
Those outliers can really throw things off.
Yeah, you can't just ignore it, but you also can't let it completely derail everything.
Exactly.
So how do you strike that balance?
It takes careful work.
Hmm.
Researchers use what's called outlier analysis to figure out if it's just a data entry error,
Oh, okay.
or maybe it's something really weird that you need to look into.
Interesting.
Or is it legit, but just, outside what you expected?
So it's about understanding like the story behind that piece of data, not just being like, oh, it doesn't fit, throw it out.
Yeah, exactly.
But then what about the treasure chests that are missing altogether? I'm thinking about publication bias, where studies that don't have like the most exciting findings might never actually get out there.
That is a huge issue. It's like you only ever hear the stories of the treasure hunts that were a big success, right? But you never hear about the ones that came back empty-handed.
And that can really skew your perspective, right? You start to think that every treasure hunt you go on is going to be this amazing success.
Totally, and that's what publication bias can do. It can make us think that an effect is stronger than it really is, because those, like, null or negative results, they don't get published as much.
So how do we account for those missing pieces?
Well, luckily, there are statistical techniques to help spot and adjust for that publication bias, so it's not perfect, but it helps us get a more complete picture, even when some of the puzzle is missing.
So we're using our detective skills again. It's like trying to fill in the gaps in the historical record.
Exactly.
So we've sailed the seas, we've gathered the data, we've sorted through it, we've accounted for missing pieces. It seems like now we're finally ready to really analyze what we've got.
Yeah, we're getting there. Now it's time for the data analysis part, where we really dig in and start looking for patterns in the data.
Okay, so we've talked about how meta-analysis isn't just about crunching numbers, it's about getting to those juicy insights. So how do we go beyond just looking at averages to really understand what the data's telling us?
Right, because averages can be helpful,
Yeah.
but they can also hide important stuff. Like, imagine you're looking at the average temperature of a city for a whole year. That one number isn't going to tell you if that city has crazy hot summers and freezing cold winters, or if it's pretty much the same all year round.
So it's like with our treasure chests, it's not just about how much treasure there is, but it's like, how's it spread out? Where is it?
Exactly. And that's why researchers look at heterogeneity,
Okay.
which is just a fancy way of saying how spread out are these results.
Gotcha.
Are all the studies finding pretty much the same thing, or are they all over the place?
And if they're all over the place, that tells us we need to look closer, right?
Right. It probably means there are other things going on, those it depends factors we talked about, that are influencing how strong or weak that relationship is.
Okay.
And those factors are called moderators.
Moderator.
Moderators, yeah. And finding them is like finding the hidden levers that can change everything.
Oh, okay. Can you give me an example of how moderators work?
Sure. Let's say you're looking at like a new teaching method.
Mm-hmm.
A meta-analysis might show that on average, it helps students a little bit. But then when you look at the moderators, you might find out that it actually works way better for students from certain backgrounds or with certain learning styles.
So instead of just saying, oh, this method kind of works, we can say, hey, it really works for these students in these situations.
Exactly. And that lets us get way more specific and tailored in our understanding.
That's really cool. Now, our source material mentions some advanced ways that researchers analyze these moderators. Have you heard of meta-regression?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I feel like I've heard of it, but I could
Okay.
use a little refresher.
So think of it like this. Imagine you're upgrading from a magnifying glass to like a super high-powered microscope.
Okay.
Meta-regression lets you zoom in and really examine the relationship between those moderators and whatever you're studying.
So instead of just saying ship size matters for a treasure hunt,
Mm.
we can figure out exactly how much it matters and what other things might be affecting how much treasure we find.
Exactly, yeah. And then if we want to get even more advanced,
Oh, there's more.
There's something called meta-analytic structural equation modeling.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. It is.
Awesome, awesome.
MASM, yeah. It's a really powerful technique, but don't let the name scare you.
Okay.
It's like, imagine instead of looking at puzzle pieces one at a time, you can see how they all fit together in 3D.
Okay.
That's kind of what MASM does. It helps us understand really complex relationships between tons of variables all at once.
Wow. It's like having X-ray vision into the world of research. So let's say we've done our meta-analysis, we found some really cool stuff, we've mapped out what we know. What's next?
Well, a treasure map isn't helpful if you keep it hidden away, right?
True, true.
So we got to share those research findings if we want them to matter. And I don't just mean the conclusions.
Okay.
We have to be really clear about the whole process,
So not just what we found, but how we found it.
right? Transparency builds trust. You know, we got to be upfront about the decisions we made, the methods we used, even the problems we ran into. That way, other people can see if our work's any good, maybe try to replicate it and build on it.
So we're basically giving them step-by-step instructions so they can follow in our footsteps.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to the last thing our source material talks about, which is the need to keep learning.
Okay.
Every meta-analysis, no matter how good, it's really just a snapshot in time, right?
Right.
As new research comes out, our understanding changes,
Mm-hmm.
and something that we thought was a sure thing, well, we might need to look at it again.
It's like they say, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
That's a good one.
Right.
Yeah. So meta-analysis is this incredible tool for navigating research. It helps us cut through the noise, figure out what's really true, and see those hidden patterns that can really change how we see things. But it's an ongoing process, you know? It never really ends.
Well, this has been fascinating. I feel like I have so many new ways to look at research now.
That's great to hear.
It's really eye-opening. And for our listeners, keep an eye out for meta-analysis in your own fields because you never know what you might find. Until next time, keep exploring.